Germany's counterattack at Mortain. In the early morning fog of August 7, 1944, a desperate gamble unfolded in the Norman countryside. Code-named Operation Luttich, the German counteroffensive at Mortain. This was Hitler's attempt to contain the Allied breakout from Normandy. Over the next week, one of Normandy's most dramatic armored battles would decide the fate of France, and perhaps the entire Western Front. Background. By early August 1944, the Normandy campaign had reached its breaking point. Since D-Day, German forces had been locked in a brutal stalemate against Allied armies. But on July 25, Operation Cobra shattered the front. American troops broke through at Saint-Lô, and General Patton's Third Army erupted into Brittany. The German situation was dire. Their left flank was collapsing, and the entire Seventh Army faced encirclement. Field Marshal Günther von Kluge, commander of German forces in the west, saw reality clearly. A withdrawal to the east where a defensible line could be created was the only option. But Hitler saw another way. At the Wolf's Lair, the Führer studied maps and saw what he believed was Allied overextension. American forces were pushing south and west, thinning their lines as they progressed. Hitler envisaged a classic blitzkrieg stroke, a strike to cut off the American spearhead, and an armored dash to reach the coast at Avranches and trap Patton's army. The plan. Operation Luttich, named for the 1914 Battle of Liege where German forces first demonstrated their offensive prowess. It might have been a competent battle plan if Germany still had sufficient strength to pull it off. The plan was audacious: assemble Germany's last armored reserves in the west. 4 panzer divisions, the 2nd, 116th, 1st SS, and 2nd SS, would strike westward through Mortain, a distance of just 20 miles to Avranches on the coast. Success would sever the single road supplying Patton's entire Third Army. But the plan had fatal flaws. First, timing. The attack was scheduled for August 6, then delayed to the 7th, giving the American troops critical hours to prepare. Second, objectives were unrealistic. German units were already depleted, with some divisions at 30% strength. Third, logistics. Fuel was critically short, with some tanks having barely enough to reach their objectives. Most critically, Hitler ignored intelligence warnings. Ultra-intercepts had already revealed German intentions to Allied commanders. The alert had not made its way down to units in the U.S. 30th Infantry Division, so tactical surprise was achieved. However, Allied tactical air forces were alerted and prepared to launch counterattacks against the German offensive. The opposing forces. On paper, the German force seemed formidable: 120 Panther tanks, 70 Panzer IVs, and supporting infantry, about 30,000 troops total. These were elite Waffen-SS and veteran Panzer units. Facing them were elements of the American 30th Infantry Division, Old Hickory, holding positions around Mortain. They were supported by the 4th Infantry Division and elements of the 2nd Armored Division. Total forces, about 25,000 Americans. But the real disparity wasn't in numbers, it was in support. The Americans had unprecedented air superiority. By August 1944, Allied aircraft could operate with near impunity over Normandy. Additionally, Allied artillery had perfected rapid response techniques. With excellent radios, well-trained and numerous forward observers and superior fire direction control, American artillery was able to call accurate, devastating fire within minutes. The Germans, meanwhile, would attack with minimal air cover. The once feared German Air Force could muster barely 100 sorties for the entire operation. The commanders. Commanding all German forces in the West was Field Marshal von Kluge. A competent officer. He had been the commander of Army Group Center on the Eastern Front before being wounded. He had taken over command in France after Gerd von Rundstedt was dismissed for making defeatist comments. For his part, von Kluge privately called the operation hopeless but followed orders. Opposing him was General Omar Bradley, commanding the American 12th Army Group. Bradley, cautious but capable, had been warned by ultra-decrypts. He reinforced Mortain. At the tactical level, German commanders like Otto Baum of the 2nd SS Panzer Division were veterans of the Eastern Front, but unfamiliar with Western Allied tactics and air power. On the American side, the leadership of Major General Leland Hobbs of the 30th Division would prove decisive when he held the high ground at Hill 317. The battle. At 1 a.m. on August 7th, German panzer divisions started to move. The normal artillery bombardment was skipped in an attempt to gain tactical surprise. The 2nd Panzer Division advanced north from the German lines. The 2nd SS Panzer Division, the Das Reich Division, captured Mortain itself. The 1st SS Panzer Division, the Leibstandarte Adolf Hitler Division, pushed west. It met stiff resistance but managed to tie down elements of the US 117th Infantry. The 116th Panzer Division did not move, due either to communication problems or a lack of serviceable vehicles. Nonetheless, the Germans managed to advance about 10 miles or 15 kilometers by dawn of the 7th of August. As the morning fog burned away, reality set in. At Hill 317, just east of Mortain, the 2nd Battalion of the 120th Infantry Regiment refused to budge. Surrounded and cut off, 700 Americans held the high ground, calling down artillery on German formations below. Allied aircraft were initially grounded due to fog and low overcast. However, the Germans were not able to advance any further than what they had achieved by dawn. The skies cleared at around midday. Then came the drone of the fighter bombers. Typhoons, Thunderbolts, and Mustangs swarmed like hornets. Without air cover, German columns became death traps. A Panzer IV commander later recalled, "The road became a shooting gallery. We couldn't see the planes until the rockets were already incoming." Allied response. Bradley's response was immediate and overwhelming. He halted Patton's advance into Brittany and redirected forces toward Mortain. The 35th and 29th Divisions moved to reinforce the flanks. But the real German killer was artillery. American forward observers on Hill 317 directed fire with devastating precision. One artillery battalion fired 5,000 rounds in 24 hours. By August 8, the German advance had stalled just 7 miles from their start line. They had failed to reach even the halfway point to Avranches. Worse still, the attack had exposed the German left flank. To the south, Patton's Third Army was now racing eastward, toward the German rear. Finally, Operation Totalize, a Canadian offensive south of Caen, began on the night of August 7. This push by the Canadian First Army aimed to take the city of Falaise and threatened to encircle hundreds of thousands of German troops in northern France. Weapons and tactics. The battle showcased technological and tactical evolution. German armor was qualitatively superior with regard to gun power and armor. The Panther's 75mm gun could penetrate any Allied tank at long range. But they were mechanically fragile, with complex maintenance needs. American Shermans, while outgunned, were reliable, numerous, and supported by excellent combined arms doctrine. But the real game-changer was air-ground coordination. American pilots could respond within 30 minutes of a call. The Germans had no answer to the overwhelming air superiority of the Allied air forces at this stage of the war, nor to the Allied artillery which outclassed the German artillery in nearly every way. Logistics and morale. Logistics decided the battle before it began. German units began the attack with 1.2 fuel loads, enough for about 60 miles. When vehicles broke down, as Panthers frequently did, recovery was nearly impossible. American logistics were brilliant. The Red Ball Express would soon deliver 12,000 tons of supplies daily. Every Sherman had its ammunition and fuel. Morale told a similar story. German troops were veterans, but many sensed this was a last throw of the dice. American morale, while tested, was fortified by material superiority and a sense of momentum. The defenders of Hill 317, though surrounded, believed relief would come, and it did. What could Germany have done differently? Military historians debate several alternatives. First, timing. Attacking on August 6 as originally planned might have caught Americans less prepared. Second, objective. A limited counterattack to stabilize the line might have preserved forces for the defense of the Reich. Third, coordination. Combining Luttich with simultaneous attacks elsewhere might have stretched Allied reserves. But ultimately, Operation Luttich was doomed by August 1944's realities. Allied air supremacy, shattered German logistics opposed by the formidable logistics of the Allied armies, and the unprecedented intelligence superiority provided by the Allies' ultra-decrypts. The best alternative might have been no attack at all, conserving armor for the defense of Germany. Aftermath. Operation Luttich's failure was a serious loss for Germany. Instead of cutting off Americans, German forces were now themselves cut off. Just days later, the Farley Pocket would form, trapping 100,000 German troops. Casualties reflected the disaster. Germans suffered approximately 10,000 killed and wounded, with 150 tanks destroyed. American losses were 3,000 to 4,000, mostly in the heroic 30th Division. The battle demonstrated that by 1944, the German army could no longer execute blitzkrieg against a well-supplied enemy with air supremacy. It also showcased American adaptability, from Bradley's strategic response to the artillerymen on Hill 317. Operation Luttich was Hitler's last offensive in Normandy. The fields around Mortain today are quiet. Crosses and memorials mark where desperate men fought for a fading cause. In the end, it wasn't just a battle lost, but the last illusion of German victory in Normandy shattered forever.